Up until now, I was never really able to figure out if Helmet Head was just a victim of her own ideology or if she was in fact a puppet politician of sorts. But it's becoming evident as far as I'm concerned that the latter is most definitely the case. You know, the way that I've come to separate politicians from puppets is to observe whether they ever acknowledge contradictions and or conversations that could, in effect, change their mind potentially. Or is it that they stick within the confines of their agenda, or their script even, and remain oblivious, in effect, to the outside world? With Guy Verhofstadt's recent outburst at the Liberal Democrat conference, and which really emphasised what many had been saying about the EU for some time in regards to their end goals, put that into contrast with Sturgeon, who seems to be swanning over to Germany today, presumably by plane, even though she wants you to think there's a crucial climate emergency that needs tackled, but didn't realise there was something so wrong with video conferences. However, the point being, she makes out it's a union of equals where all countries are treated equally and fairly. It's a European family and each and every country within it is independent. Never acknowledges what Guy Verhofstadt said, never once deviates away from the tidbits that she refers to on a day-to-day basis. Or take her claim of desperately needing immigration controls because our population is declining. She never once mentions reversing the trends. In fact, she never mentions the birth rates at all, unless it's to talk about how they're falling. It seems to be exempt from all discussion. Nobody ever seems to bring it up. And while they do nothing but scream about needing immigration controls, it seems that this is their way of covertly dispelling the so-called myths of immigration that they've been planning to tackle for some time now. There's another example, actually. I'm still waiting. 2-3 years now they've been making out that they're going to dispel said myths, but it seems that their method of dispelling said myths is to, again, never acknowledge the problems. Never acknowledge anything that could potentially put your position under the spotlights. Something that wouldn't be a concern, theoretically, if you weren't a puppet. Because you would be open to compromise, you'd be open to having your mind changed. It got me thinking to some of the things that Sturgeon says on a regular basis, as well as her Rainbow Unicorn delegates. And some of the things that I included in the video I made the other day, from Merkel and Guy Verhofstadt and so on. It seems that a lot of the things Sturgeon parrots, a lot of the things that are being incorporated into Scots law and so on behind the backs of the public, are near enough, word for word, exactly the same sort of rhetoric that the globalists, self-proclaimed globalists, say on a regular basis. For example, if I can find the Merkel video.
Verloren geht, weil sie das Volk repräsentieren. Und da muss ich sagen, Globalisierung, Nationalstaat, egal wie, das Volk sind jeweils die Menschen, die in einem Lande dauerhaft leben und nicht irgendeine Gruppe, die sie...
It doesn't matter. The people of a nation, those who live in that country permanently, the people of a nation are those who live in that country permanently, not a specific group that defines themselves as the people. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure out what that's implying. Now, you compare that to Sturgeon and what she says on a regular basis.
Scotland is a place where people should feel safe and secure and welcome, regardless of where they come from. If you choose to live in Scotland, then, as far as I'm concerned, you're Scottish. Whether you were born here and 3 generations of your family were born here, or whether you've only lived here for a few months. There is that one word in the English language that is used to describe different viewpoints on a very wide spectrum, from far-right racists, economic nationalists, through to what my party advocates, which is self-government for a country. It's not based on any considerations of ethnicity. Our view is anybody is welcome to come to Scotland. Where you come from doesn't matter. If you
or how they now disavow nationalism and attribute it to the far right and fascism, etc., etc., all conveniently at the same time as the communist one world government seems to be steamrolling towards us. You know, Juncker, Verhofstadt, the UN, etc., etc. They all seem to really have disdain for nationalism. It seems to be a major barrier to internationalism and the removal of sovereignty, etc. However, digressing, really just depends on the outcome of Brexit. If it is, in fact, that we are to be shackled to the European Union forevermore, and it really is all a dog and pony show, I reckon it stands to reason that at some point the Union would have to be broken up. I doubt that the European Union would consume the UK as a union within a union. So, looking at it from that perspective, it's to a degree justified, at the very least. Well, maybe not the right word. This is to be expected, I suppose you could say, from the SNP. But as far as the public is concerned, as far as the public are aware, and as far as the narrative will have you believe, the SNP are intent on having independence if Brexit happens, or they're going to have a referendum anyway. There's no mention, obviously, of the ever-encroaching federalisation and whether or not we will be a part of it or not. And in recent weeks, especially this week, the rewritten history, the fabricated version of events that led to the referendum result of 2014 going the way that it did, is becoming completely and utterly ingrained within public discourse, and it seems to have been mentioned so many times that it's actually starting to appear true to some. As not only are the SNP repeating it, people are claiming that that's why they voted the way they did in 2014. Journalists, publications, you name it, they're all doing it now. What started off as Helmet Head rewriting history has now become the go-to point in order to try and justify staying within Europe for Scotland. Saying here, for example, reflecting on the anniversary of the first vote in independence, the First Minister tweeted, "In IndyRef, UK politicians told us that independence would see us thrown out of the EU. Today, 5 years on, I'm in Germany fighting for an EU future that we stand to lose because we're not independent. Scotland's future belongs in Scotland's hands," but it wouldn't be in Scotland's hands, would it? Another one, for example, this is STV News, same day. It says down here, "At the time of the referendum, Scots were told they could be cast out of the European Union if they voted yes, but 2 years later the UK as a whole vote for Brexit despite almost 2/3 of Scots supporting Remain." And she says here, in an article she published today, "Before the 2014 referendum, and in stark contrast to Boris Johnson's preposterous promises plastered on the side of his Brexit bus," of course those promises could have been upheld and acted upon if we weren't pumping fuck knows how much into the European Union to subsidise them. Nonetheless, we published a white paper that ran to more than 600 pages and was ripped apart and scrutinised by many, so much so that I'm pretty sure that you have quietly disposed of said white paper. But it's this white paper that I want to bring attention to in order to debunk their bullshit yet again.
Well, in 2014, had Scotland won independence, we would have been out of the EU immediately with no guarantees of getting back in. So what you're saying now isn't the same as what you would have said in 2014.
Madam, forgive me, your question is based on a false premise. Had we voted for independence in 2014, we would have entered into negotiations in parallel with London and with the European Union.
Yeah.
Now, that was that.
See what I'm saying? This is the response that you will always hear from these people. And even though that woman was correct in what she says, that we would have been out of the European Union, as I said, they're always quick to remind you that they had every intention of taking us back in at some point. So, with that in mind, as I said before, this idea that people voted to remain within the UK referendum of 2014 purely so they could stay within the EU, they were worried about their EU membership, but yet you've got the SNP making out that we would have been rejoining anyway, kind of makes it rather laughable, to say the least. Fucking lies, to put it bluntly. And a lot of these people that hang off the SNP's every word know this themselves, because a few years ago they would have been quick to tell you that they voted to leave in 2014, but now all of a sudden if you question them, a good portion of them refuse to answer. And why do you think that is? Because they know themselves that giving the answer would contradict the claims being made now. Because if it's all about independence coinciding with EU membership. That's all it's all about. Then why didn't these independent supporters vote Remain in 2014? Do you not see how this whole narrative makes no fucking sense? Nonetheless, I'm really digressing at this point. It's getting too long. So 16 hours ago, helmet head, SNP will wash away resistance to IndyRef 2. So she's literally rehashing the same turn of phrase she used a few weeks ago. 5 years ago, voters took to the polls to cast their vote on independence. Look at this, man. Puppet, or politically and ideologically brainwashed puppet. Pathetic fucking puppet. 5 years after people in Scotland voted to stay part of the UK, the country's facing the possibility of a snap general election. But here we go. Westminster's resistance to giving Scots a second vote in independence will be washed away. Westminster's resistance. Westminster's fucking resistance. The only resistance that I've seen, and I have to admit I've not seen much, is in regards to the talk of the referendum bill, or the independence bill, whatever it's called. This framework that they're trying to implement, passing through the Parliament as we speak, which relies on Westminster granting them permission for them to then go on and have a legalised referendum in the foreseeable future. Now, the reason that they use to justify why this demand should be respected derives from the claim that the SNP, or Helmet Head in particular, persistently make on a day-to-day basis. This claim being that they've got a mandate, and this mandate states that they have the right to call a referendum by the end of this parliamentary term. But the mandate states that circumstantial changes need to occur, and or Brexit, aka being dragged out of Europe against our will, and I'm pretty sure it used to say once upon a time, but for some strange reason it now includes or, a clear majority that want independence. None of the three have come into effect, but this referendum bill that they're trying to pass would remove the needs to meet any of the aforementioned criteria and just have a referendum for the fuck of it. So naturally, it attracted scrutiny and criticism. And it's a complete contradiction, because they claim they've got a mandate. They then use this claim as justification to try and pass through some referendum bill in order to grant them a referendum which can be called upon without the need to meet criteria. But they are taking the criticism that's been directed their way in regards to this attempt to push through this referendum bill. They've taken the criticism and they've made it seem as if the criticism is being directed and the resistance, quote unquote, is all based around the idea that we have a mandate. And Helmet Head and the SNP in general have a tendency to manipulate the narrative every time they have the opportunity to do so and make it seem as though they are rejecting outright our right to choose, our right, our mandate, etc., etc. Disregarding the contradictions in terms of they've spent 3 years trying to stop Brexit completely, and now, and only now, they're starting to talk about independence again. I told you it was a plan B. I've been saying that for the longest time. They don't give a fuck about independence, unless that's what the agenda dictates later on down the line. But for the time being, they would have been quite content if the UK had voted to remain within the European Union. They would have been quite content with the people's vote and so on and so forth. The only reason that they're talking about it now is because there's a possibility, and I say slight possibility, of Brexit occurring. Helmet Head, who was in Berlin on Wednesday, said the 2014 referendum was the biggest democratic event Scotland has ever had. 5 years on, she says Scotland has been ripped out of the EU against our will, quote unquote, and you know, at the end of the day, as has been stated a multitude of times before, the only person that seems to be hell-bent on Scotland remaining within the European Union is you. You might have some die-hard followers that agree with you, but for the most part, people voted in that referendum reading the question the way it was written on the fucking ballot paper. It's only your fucking warped mind that's seen that question in a completely different context. Westminster leader Beta Blackford joined young campaigners in Glasgow to make the case for a fresh ballot. Helmet Head saying it is worth remembering nobody born this century has had a say in 2014 or indeed a say in the UK's ill-fated EU referendum. All this pandering to young people, have you not noticed that in terms of climate change or in this context? And of course that's got everything to do with the fact that the curriculum of excrement prioritises political brainwashing and propaganda for the fucking most part, teaching them about climate change and all that shit in primary 1. Anyway. But young people from every town and community in Scotland will have their say in a fresh independence referendum that you've got no fucking jurisdiction to be able to call upon unless Westminster grants you permission. The SNP won the most seats in Holyrood in 2016 after fighting the election on a manifesto pledging there should be a second independence referendum if there was a significant change of circumstances, which there has not been. Point in case. Fucking hell, man. In 2017, they won a key vote at Holyrood, and in 2017 they also lost a third of their seats. A fact they have a tendency to leave out of all discussions. A win for the SNP in an upcoming election will simply reinforce the Helmet Head saying no Westminster government of any party has the right to stand in the way of the sovereign right. The sovereign right. Don't even go down that route. If I fucking... Oh, it's too late at night to start getting angry. Anyway, a win for the SNP in any upcoming election will simply reinforce that. The Westminster wall of opposition to an independence referendum is already crumbling. So of course she's doing this as a way to try and muster up more votes so she can retain power and continue to do what she's been doing for the longest time behind the scenes while nobody ever seems to bat an eyelid. But it's absolutely everything to do with the fact that, and by her own admission, she's obsessed with keeping the SNP in power, which you can take that how you will, but if anything, that just appears to me to be justification or evidence even to be directed back to in the foreseeable future if people start to think something's odd. But anyway, point being that they will say and do anything they can to retain power, to make sure that they keep Scotland on course to Agenda 2030. They need to make sure that Scotland is firmly under their thumb so they can continue to incorporate and update the legislation and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, harping on and on and on about a fucking mandate, but yet you're demanding that Westminster grant you permission for a Bakshi referendum or a secondary referendum. If you had the mandate that you claim you do, you would need to go through this whole process. So it doesn't matter how many seats you manage to obtain in any upcoming election. The fact of the matter remains the same. You don't have a mandate to be able to call upon. It's just an excuse to obtain more votes. But going back to what I said at the very beginning of this video in regards to her being a fucking puppet, this is where I really can't stress enough that people really need to start doing their homework on what the SNP, and her in particular, are getting up to behind the scenes. The UN's definition of indigenous, for example, specific groups of people that survived colonialism. So, white man bad, right off the bat. But there's worldwide consensus that their heritage and their identity gets to be protected. Their homelands also. Yet, our homelands, it's open season where we live. It's open season across the West. Every single European country is suffering the same fate now. And when she talks about human rights, what do you think she means? What do you think she means when she refers to living up to the responsibilities that would be expected of us if we were to remain part of the European Union or rejoin it?